Welcome back. I'm going to say right at the start, I try to space this out. I'm like, yeah, it looks pretty spaced out, and then like evenly, and then it's not. It never is, and that's just I want to acknowledge that because yeah, it drives me crazy too. But what I've got on the board here is teams 1 through 32 in terms of points percentage in the NHL because standings and points and all this, and it's great. But points percentage is probably the most accurate way to look at it. So we go from Boston to Anaheim, and you can see differences. So I went through all the stats, I went through all the numbers. And so I wanted to talk about each team briefly, and we'll go over what the route to success has been for teams or why certain teams are failing. Starting with Boston, they have an 889 points percentage. That's a little high. They have 13 regulation wins. Remember, that's your tiebreaker to make the playoffs. First period, they're outscoring their opponents 19-9. Second period, they outscore their opponents 24-19. Third period, 29-9. So, yeah, Boston just dominating in the first and third. The second, a little bit shakier. They've outscored the opposition 2-0 in overtime. They're 9-1 in their last 10. They've won 6 in a row. They have 11 wins when they've outshot their opposition, and they're 12-0 when they score first. Whatever number you want to use for Boston, they're playing pretty well. So we'll see if that continues, but honestly, they've built a pretty strong run. The one number that's close is the second period's a little bit messy, but it seems like the second period is usually where we get a lot of the scoring in the NHL. First period, less scoring. Teams are probably, feeling each other out, trying to figure out where they're going to attack and how they're going to defend and all that fun stuff. Second period, it's crazy. You've got the long change in the second period too, which definitely makes a difference. And then in the third, you've just got that momentum that rolls on. So for Boston, their best period is the third, where they outscore the opposition 29-9. New Jersey, 833 points percentage. Yep, 12 regulation wins. That's second overall in the NHL. In the first period, they're outscoring the opposition 19-12. Second period, 25-19, so almost the same number as Boston. 21-11 in the third, and in overtime, 3-0. So every period, including overtime, they are outscoring the opposition. They have 13 wins when they outshoot the opposition. That's first in the NHL. Their shots per game is second in the NHL at 36.9. Their shot differential, so how many shots they get more than their opponents, 12.2, which is first overall in the NHL, and they are 10-0 in their last 10 games. Much like Boston, New Jersey, there isn't really a weak stat there. And whether or not they can continue that, we'll see. But so far through almost the first quarter of the season, it's going pretty well. Vegas, 763 points percentage for them, 11 regulation wins. They're outscoring their opposition in almost every period. 23-9 in the first, 17-17 in the second, and then in the third, 25-20. So they're getting the goals in the third. They're allowing too many in the third is the problem. In overtime, they outscore the opposition 3-1. They have 3 wins when they're trailing after 2. That's one of the top numbers in the NHL. They're very dangerous in the third. 19.7 blocked shots per 60 minutes, which is first in the NHL. And they're 11-2 when they score first. So you want to get that first goal on Vegas, and you don't want to let up in the third period. They have a 7-2-1 record in their last 10 games. Dallas has a 667 points percentage. They also have 11 regulation wins. First period is their bread and butter. They're outscoring their opposition 24-7. Second period, sloppy, 26-24. Third period, 21-16. So they outscore their opposition in every period until overtime, where they've scored 0. They've allowed 2. Over their last 10 games, they're 6-3-1. Dallas playing pretty well. Colorado, 656 is their points percentage. 8 regulation wins for them. 15-8, they outscore their opposition in the first. 22-15 in the second. 19-16 in the third. So they outscore the opposition in every period until overtime, where the scoring there is 1-1. They're 7-3 in their last 10 games. So Colorado playing pretty well. As I said with the power rankings this week, and I've been saying recently, it feels like we're starting to see things settle out, and certain teams are at the top, and other teams are kind of mired over here. For the Winnipeg Jets, they also have 656 points percentage, only 6 regulation wins, and they're getting outscored in the first period 16-10. So they got to start on time. Second period, they outscore the opposition 16-10, and then in the third, they outscore the opposition 16-11, and in overtime, 4-1. So it will surprise few that looking at those numbers, they have 4 wins when they trail after the first period. That is one of the top numbers in the league. They have a 7-2-1 record in their last 10 games. So really, if Winnipeg didn't put themselves behind the 8 ball in the first period, they might have an even better record than what they have right now. For Tampa Bay, 639 points percentage for them, 8 regulation wins. They're outscoring the opposition in almost every period. 20-15 in the first. They get outscored in the second, 19-16. So the long change has been a bit of a struggle for them. They outscore their opposition 22-21 in the third, and they outscore the opposition 3-0 in overtime. They're 7-2-1 in their last 10. Their numbers have been getting better. I'm a little bit surprised at how mediocre the scoring by period numbers are, but again, Tampa Bay's games have been close this year. So Seattle also has a 639 points percentage. They have 8 regulation wins. They're also 7-2-1 in their last 10. The scoring per period, honestly, they're a little bit better than Tampa Bay. Yeah, I'm surprised too. 17-13 in the first, 21-19 in the second, and then 18-14 in the third. They outscore the opposition in every period. In overtime, they are being outscored, but they've scored 2, they've allowed 3, so it's better than it was last year for Seattle in overtime. If those numbers hold up, then yeah, we're going to see Seattle in the playoffs. Then you get to Carolina, a little bit more writing with Carolina. They have a 639 points percentage. They have 7 regulation wins. They're outscoring their opposition in 2 of 3 periods. 15-11 in the first, 19-17 in the second. They have been outscored 17-16 in the third, and in overtime 3-1. So finishing out games has been an issue for Carolina, comparatively speaking. They do have 10 wins when they outshoot the opposition. Their shot differential, 10.2. That is second in the NHL behind New Jersey with a 12.2 shot differential. Their blocked shots, 32nd in the league at 8.99 per 60 minutes. So they do not block shots. Over their last 10 games, Carolina is 5-3-2. So Carolina's numbers not exactly where they want them to be right now, but still overall their points percentage is good. 632 points percentage for Toronto. They have 9 regulation wins. So for regulation wins, they're ahead of everybody else on this part of the board until you get to Dallas and above, but they're still above these guys. They're scoring 18-17 in the first, 20-14 in the second, 18-16 in the third, but then in overtime they get outscored 4-1. So they're not getting the overtime points that they'd want. 5 wins, though, when they trail after the first period. So they're good at the comebacks. I believe they lead the league with the 5 wins after when they're trailing after 1, but you don't want to be trailing after 1. Over their last 10, they are 6-1-3. So those lost points in overtime, they hurt, and so we'll see if that has any effect on where they end up finishing at the end of the year, because the East looks pretty close. Then we get to the second column where we get to Detroit. 611 points percentage, 8 wins. They're outscored in the first 19-13, which is too bad because they outscore the opposition in the second and the third. 23-14 in the second, so they like the long change. 22-21 in the third, they get outscored 3-1 in overtime. Last 10 games, they're 5-3-2, so they're rattling off enough wins that they're staying above the playoff line. The Islanders, 579 is their points percentage, 9 regulation wins. They do get outscored in the first 12-9. Both teams themselves and their opposition 22 goals in the second period. They outscore the opposition 30-19 in the third. They like third periods. In overtime, they've scored 2 goals. They've allowed none. Their record over their last 10 is 6-4. So if they could channel that third period energy into their first periods, they'd have an even better record. For the New York Rangers, they have a 579 points percentage as well. They have 8 regulation wins. They score 11. They allow 11 in the first period. They outscore the opposition in the second 20-15, in the third 24-22. They've been outscored in overtime 3-1. They are 8-0-1 when they score first. So scoring first is a key thing for them. They have a 5-3-2 record over their last 10 games. And then you get to LA, 571 is their points percentage. 8 regulation wins. They've been outscored in the first and the third. 21-18 in the first, 23-18 in the second. Or in the third, I should say. In the second period, they actually outscore the opposition 28-25. They've scored and allowed 2 goals in overtime. They're 5-3-2 in their last 10. They do have 4 wins when they're trailing after the first period. So really for LA, overall the numbers aren't bad. But they if they improve the first and third period, right? And that's the thing. They have a 571 points percentage. Look like they should be a playoff team, and yet they're being outscored in 2 of the 3 periods. Fix that up, and they have an even better record. 556 points percentage for the Edmonton Oilers. 9 regulation wins. Starting on time has been an issue for them as well. They get outscored in the first period 20-13 this season. They're outscoring their opposition from there. 26-23 in the second, 24-21 in the third, and outscoring the opposition 1-0 in overtime. They're 5-5 in their last 10, and what you get from Edmonton one game to the next has been all over the place, but they're never boring to watch. Pittsburgh, 553 points percentage, good road trip for them. They now have 9 regulation wins. They outscore their opposition 15-13 in the first, 29-21 in the second, then get outscored 27-26 in the third, and 3-0 in overtime. So they haven't won in overtime. They've lost 3 in overtime. They're 5-3-2 in their last 10 games. And again, Pittsburgh sitting below the playoff line. For how long? We shall see. St. Louis, 529 points percentage for them, and bonkers. Just bonkers season for them. 7 regulation wins. They've outscored the opposition 16-8 in the first, but they get outscored from there 29-20 in the second and 21-12 in the third. They do have the only overtime goal, though. 1-0 in overtimes. They're 6-4 in their last 10 because they've won 6 in a row after they lost 8 in a row. No idea where St. Louis is going to end up. Calgary also has a 529 points percentage. They had a 7-game winless drought there too. 6 regulation wins for them. They do outscore their opposition in the first 21-20, in the second 19-16, in the third not so much. They get outscored 20-11. They also get outscored in overtime 2-1. They're 3-5-2 in their last 10, and they have 6 losses where they outshoot their opponents, which is one of the top numbers in the league. So that's a problem, that they outshoot their opposition and they lose the game anyways. So if you want to blame that on the goaltending, okie dokie. You want to blame that on the defense, go right on ahead. Montreal, 528 is their points percentage. They have 5 regulation wins. They outscore their opposition in the first 16-11. It goes downhill after that. 24-16, they're outscored in the second. 27-21, they're outscored in the third. They outscore their opposition 2-1 in overtime. They are throwing 15.76 hits per 60 minutes. That's second to last in the league. I assume those are all Jack-Eye. They have a 5-4-1 record over their last 10. They're not going away, even though the numbers would tell you they should be, but they're not. So they do get outscored, but they do find ways to win games. 526 is the points percentage for Florida. This is a very low number for Florida. 8 regulation wins. They're outscoring their opposition 17-15 in the first. They get outscored 21-17 in the second. They outscore the opposition 29-26 in the third period, and they've scored 0 and allowed 1 in overtime. They have 7 losses when they're outshooting their opposition. So much like Calgary, they have problems where they're outshooting their opposition, and it's just the puck can't stay out of their net. We saw that yesterday against Columbus. So that put them from 6-7. Of course, Calgary had one against Tampa Bay that worked that way. And shots per game, Florida's first in the league at 40.8 shots per game. So you have to wonder what's going to happen with Florida, because the numbers are decent with Florida, but again, whether you want to blame the goaltending, whether you want to blame the defense, go right on ahead. But yes, Calgary and Florida, while they made that big trade in the offseason and both were, seeing themselves as contenders, neither team has overly benefited to this point. I know Tkachuk's playing really well for Florida, but it just feels like something's off with the team, and when you make a big deal, that can happen. Then we get over to the third column with Nashville. 500 record for them, 7 regulation wins. They get outscored in the first and the third. They get outscored 21-15 in the first. They do outscore the opposition 19-16 in the second, meaning they like the long change. They get outscored 20-14 in the third and 1-0 in overtime. Their hits, they're first in the league at 31.08 hits per 60 minutes. Hits is always an interesting number because it can indicate that your team doesn't have the puck as often, because if you throw a hit while your team has a puck, that's interference. So their record over their last 10 is 5-4-1. It does feel like Nashville's on the verge of turning it around and going on a bit of a run. We're just waiting on that right now. Philadelphia is 500 as well, 7 regulation wins. They get outscored badly in the first period, 20-11. They outscore the opposition 19-10 in the second. Another team that likes the long change. They get outscored in the third, 23-16, and in overtime, which oddly enough also has a long change, 3-0. So for Philadelphia, their blocked shots, 18.06 per 60 minutes, is second because John Tortorella is the coach and he demands it. They're 2-5-3 over their last 10, so they've only won 2 out of 10. It's been quite the drop-off for the Philadelphia Flyers recently. Cat wanted out, gotta let her out. Minnesota also has a 500 record, 5 regulation wins for Minnesota. And two of the first 2 periods, they're running at a deficit, 21-14 in the first, 14-13 in the second. They outscore their opposition 19-17 in the third, and 2-1 in overtime. They're 5-4-1 in their last 10. But if Minnesota doesn't get some consistent wins going here, we could see them fall out of the hunt for a playoff spot this year. For the Washington Capitals, a .425 points percentage is not great. 7 regulation wins. They get outscored in the first and the third. First period, 17-9. They outscore the opposition 25-20 in the second. It's weird. Teams in this column and some teams in this area seem to like the long change. They play really well in the second period. Third period for Washington, they get outscored 27-21, and in overtime, they are 0-1. They've allowed the 1 goal in overtime. They're 2-6-2 in their last 10, and hope is fading quickly for Washington's playoff hopes, even though we're only in late November. For the Vancouver Canucks, a .417 points percentage, not what was expected before the season started. 6 regulation wins. They're outscoring the opposition in the first 22-19. It is the rest of the game that's been a problem. They get outscored 22-19 in the second, 27-21 in the third, and 2-0 in overtime. So they really need to be able to... This is where I talk about locking things down in the third, that 27 goals against, the same number as the Capitals, and it's just, it sinks you, right? They have 3 losses when they're leading after the first period. That doesn't help either. They are 5-4-1 over their last 10. So winning 5 out of 10 is great, and winning half your games. The problem is they've lost too many to be able to keep doing that if they're going to stay in the hunt for a playoff spot. Columbus, also .417 points percentage, 5 regulation wins for them. They get outscored in every period, 17-12 in the first, 32-17 in the second period. That's an ouch. And 28-24 in the third period. In overtime, they do outscore the opposition 2-1. 37.3 shots against per game is 31st overall in the NHL. They are allowing way too many shots. They're 4-5-1 in their last 10. So we've talked about their goaltending, and at times their goaltending's been a problem. But Columbus is also just allowing way too many opportunities, and a lot of them of the prime variety. So Chicago, .417 points percentage for them as well. 3 teams with the same points percentage. For Chicago, just 4 regulation wins. They get outscored in every period, 20-11 in the first, 22-18 in the second, 17-13 in the third. They, in overtime, are breaking even, 2 goals for, 2 goals against. And then there's some stats here that are worth looking at. They have a 25.8 shots per game total, which is 31st in the NHL. And their shot differential is a negative 8.8 per game. That's also 31st in the NHL. They are 2-0-2 when they score first. So if they score first, stick around. There's a good chance they probably aren't going to win the game. It's 500 record. And the fact they've only scored first 4 times is not great. They're 2-6-2 in their last 10, which is kind of what was expected. Arizona, .406 is their points percentage. They don't have a period where they outscore their opposition either. 18-8 in the first, 15-11 in the second, 24-22 in the third, and they've been outscored 1-0 in overtime as well. A lot of scoring in seconds and third periods this year. Third periods, I think, are still the highest total, but seconds definitely too. So for Arizona, there's some notes here too. 24.1 shots per game is last overall in the NHL by a bit, because 25.8 is Chicago, 24.1 is Arizona. They're the bottom 2. The negative 10.7 shot differential, that's worst in the league. So they're making their goaltenders dig their way out of this trouble. They are 4-0-1 when they score first. So they haven't lost in regulation when they score first, but they don't score first very often. They're 4-5-1 in their last 10. It is a 14-game road trip that they're on, and that makes things more difficult. Then you got Buffalo. 389 is their points percentage. 6 regulation wins. They're outscored in 2 out of 3 periods. 22-17 in the first. 21-18 in the second. They do have a positive differential in the third of 26-23. And in overtime, they've scored once and allowed 0. Their hits per 60 minutes, 13.44. That's last in the league. Blocked shots, a very not John Tortorella-like 11.44 blocked shots per 60 minutes. That is the second lowest number in the league. The lowest number in the league, of course, being Carolina over here. So Buffalo, not an overly physical team, and a team that's had its struggles. They're 2-8 in their last 10, and they've lost those 8 in a row. So for Buffalo, again, I think a lot of it is this is a young team. They're learning. They're coming together, and it happens. With a 382 points percentage, way too low, is Ottawa. 6 regulation wins for them as well. They get outscored in the first 2 periods and try to dig their way out. They're outscored 19-17 in the first, 21-16 in the second. They do outscore the opposition 23-18 in the third. They've scored none in overtime. They've allowed 1. 4 losses when they're leading after the first period. So that's the interesting thing. They allow more goals than they score in the first period, but 4 times they've had a lead after the first that they've frittered away throughout the rest of the game. Their hits per 60 minutes, 29.87. That is second in the league. And they're 3-6 when they score first. So that's a problem right there. They're 2-7-1 in their last 10. So they don't protect a lead well, as shown by them having a negative overall record when they score first and 4 losses when they're leading after the first period. Just shooting themselves in the foot. Then we get to the final column here, which has California in it. It's San Jose. 375 is their points percentage. 3 regulation wins. Just the 3. They're outscored in 2 periods, but in the first period, they score 17. They allow 17. They have been outscored 25-19 in the second, 26-18 in the third. They've had both of the overtime goals in the games they've played. They've gone to overtime. Not getting into the shootout, but shootout record is a bit of a different story with San Jose. 5 losses when they lead after the first period. So again, San Jose has had games where they could have won, they might have won, and they've managed to, again, frittering them away. They're 3-4-3 in their last 10. And so for San Jose, there's been 3-game winning streak, but there's been 7 losses around that 3-game winning streak. The Anaheim Ducks, 306 is their points percentage. No regulation wins. 0. So nothing. They get outscored in every period until overtime. 21-17 in the first, 29-10 in the second. That's awful. 29-10 in the second is bad. 28-17 in the third isn't a lot better. But in overtime, they've scored 3 times. They've allowed none. So in overtime, they're good. It is the other periods that they have a problem. Shootouts have been a bit of a mixed bag too, but yeah, there you go. They have 4 wins when they're trailing after 2. Keep in mind that none of those are in regulation. That's the interesting thing. They have one of the better marks in the league with 4 wins when they're trailing after 2. They have 3 losses when they're leading after 1. So how unpredictable are Anaheim games? There you go. They can win when they're leading after 2. They can lose when they're leading after 1. Sure, why not? Their shots against per game is the highest in the league at 38.1. So it's been a shooting gallery for Stolars and Gibson. That's not going to help their goaltenders. They are 2-6 when they score first, so that doesn't help either. They are 4-6 over their last 10. So they have won 4 of their last 10. Again, none of them in regulation, but they've won more of their last 10 than San Jose has, than the Buffalo Sabres, than the Ottawa Senators, the Chicago Blackhawks. So, and Washington Capitals, Philadelphia Flyers. Oh, and Calgary. There's a surprise Calgary as well. There are some teams that are struggling to find wins lately. But there you go. I just wanted to take a look at the season as we're about, or look at the standings as we're about a quarter of the way through the season. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Where do you think your favorite team is losing these games or winning these games? Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. For all your support, I will talk to you again soon.